I thank you very much for taking the time to attend this little book presentation today. Thank the Florence Lauderdale Public Library for making this event possible. And I hope by the time we get through with all of this, if you have read the book, it reinforces some of the things you've read. Maybe pick up a bit of information. And if you haven't read the book, I hope it will entice you to want to read the book. Not that I need the sales, but it's an interesting book. And I think that you will find what we talk about here today very educational, informative, and amusing in many different ways. So thank you very much for taking time to be here. Relationship of T.V.A. to World War II is a very interesting relationship, a relationship that I did not know and appreciate until I started this project. Today is a very befitting day to have this discussion because today is VJ Day, Victory over Japan. And on this day in 1945, keep forgetting which way I'm going. This way in 1945, about 9 o'clock in the morning, on the USS Missouri, who's moored in the Bay of Tokyo, along with about 250 other Allied ships, the Chinese delegation signed the unconditional documents of surrender, a leather-bound edition for the Allies and a canvas-bound edition for the Japanese. The flag that flew above the USS Missouri that day was the same flag that Commodore Perry flew on his ship in 1853 on his first of two expeditions to Japan to encourage them to open trade with the United States. So looking at what we're talking about today and looking at the day, VJ Day, is a very significant correlation. After 45 months of war, 420,000 American service people lost, 288 billion in expense, the war was over. At the end of that signing ceremony, over 800 U.S. and Allied planes flew over Tokyo Bay and over the USS Missouri to commemorate that world event. Now just stop and think about that for a minute and think about what T.V.A. did to impact September the 2nd, 1945. Our little Muscle Shoals area here was a major player in a world-renowned event. That's sort of hard to fathom because most of us thought T.V.A., that's the fertilizer plant on the road that goes over to Wilson Dam. That's what we grew up with, the mentality in our age group. Little did we know how much T.V.A. impacted September the 2nd in 1945. Actually, this book was a spin-off from another book, military history book that I did back in 2022 inside Manzano. Manzano was a nuclear storage facility out in Albuquerque, had 4 nuclear repair plants and 132 silos that retained some of the most destructive nuclear weapons that the United States has ever manufactured. I had the honor of being stationed there for a couple of years. And as I was doing the research for Inside Monsanto, I came across a news article that talked about the nitrate bombs that were used in World War II, manufactured at a little place called Muscle Shoals and a little company called T.V.A. Now, hey, that is interesting. Wonder what else is out there. So I went online, started doing some research on T.V.A. and World War II. I found nothing. No books, no consolidated articles. I found nothing. I found a few individual articles if you dig deep enough in the internet, but nothing that connected all of those things to T.V.A. So I thought, once I get through with Monsanto, I'm going to take a look at that. So I did. Started research January of 23, and I finally got that T.V.A. book published in August of 24. Now, if you go online and you query T.V.A. and World War II, this book comes up. So the whole world has the opportunity to know what T.V.A. did, to know how our area affected world event, September the 2nd, 1945. So when I started putting all of that together, I just started from square one and looked to see Muscle Shoals T.V.A. You know, Muscle Shoals T.V.A. has been an impact on most all of our lives, totally. You know, my granddad worked as a blacksmith on Wilson Dam. My dad worked at T.V.A. for 33 years. My brother, Bill, worked at T.V.A., contract on replacing spillway control gates. Sister-in-law worked in the administrative area. Had a nephew that worked on the security area. You probably have the same type thing. Have met and talked with many of you who have said, yeah, I worked at T.V.A. I was there. I know how that is. So T.V.A. has had a dramatic impact on our lives for a long time. T.V.A. provided jobs for a lot of people, not only in our Muscle Shoals area, not only in the state of Alabama, but 6 other states. The T.V.A. was totally involved in 7 states in providing jobs during that time period, World War II. That time period was an absolute, how shall I say it, gold mine for engineers. Whether you were a chemical engineer, mechanical engineer, construction engineer, production engineer, quality engineer, didn't make any difference. T.V.A. had engineers on top of engineers. And look what they did, look what they created, look what they produced, look how they connected everything together. Meanwhile, back home, people were impacted with joining the military. And those that didn't want to join the military received a little card welcoming from Uncle Sam in the way of a selective service, that I want you. The service grew in a tremendous way. The medical industry grew in a tremendous way as a result of the war situation. People at home were involved in conservation, and they were gathering metal of all types, copper of all types, rubber of all types, to take them down to a collection center that could be used for making wartime material. And people were involved. Companies that had produced consumer type goods converted to producing war type goods, airplanes, tanks, equipment, weapons, and those kind of things. So everybody had a big part in that, and there was a lot of publicity over all of those stories. And the War Department and the Chemical Warfare Service did not want TVA in the limelight. TVA was considered a critical component of the war effort. With the things that they were making and producing, they were keeping the war going. TVA was considered a high-value target. With the phosphorus and nitrate they were producing, it kept the war going. There was a lot of attempts on espionage and sabotage, and the War Department certainly wanted to protect its vital element. In the book, I talk about two different instances of German spies invading into the United States, one in 1942, one in 1944. Guess what was on their target for espionage and or sabotage if they could get to it? TVA, top on their list. The plant and the dams. TVA was not classified as a top secret or secret organization or plant, even with the FBI checking all of the background and identities of the people who were working there. So TVA did not receive any type of publicity during the active war years. They received a lot of internal publicity. They received the Army-Navy Excellence Award for every year of the war. They received the banner and then 3 stars that went along with it. Every employee received a pin that they could wear and be part of that, promoting that within the TVA organization itself. But they received very, very little publicity. Senator George Norris, who is credited with really being the backbone for TVA, senator out of Nebraska, made a statement in 1944 that rings true with our discussion and what was happening at that time. He said, "I've been everlastingly proud of the great contributions TVA has made, which cannot be fully revealed until peace returns to a tortured world." So regardless of how good TVA did, they didn't receive much in the way of publicity. Even after the war was over, you found very, very little information. You might have an article in a magazine, you might have something in the newspaper, you might have something on a brochure that was printed, or you might have something in a paper that was published. But most of that was published by TVA, and it was published for specific topics. It didn't tie anything together like what we've tied together with the book itself. So looking at TVA from an organization standpoint, they did a lot of work without any credit. And if you've been in the corporate world, you know how that feels. Somebody else, you do the work and somebody else gets the credit for it. And that's pretty much how TVA was in that. So if I think back over my early days here, I didn't really know what TVA did. I knew Dad got up and went to work at TVA, and he worked over in the phosphorus area, and that was about it. You may not be much more savvy to that. When I generally ask a question that says, "Do you know what TVA did during World War II?" the answer that I get more often than not is they made fertilizer and they produced power. That's about what we knew. As you can see, by design. And they did make fertilizer and they did produce power. You just ask the question, what else did TVA do during World War II? And when you start to research on it, you find out their involvement ran deep and wide. They did produce electrical power by the tons. They constructed dams, steam plants, producing hydroelectric power. Those power plants supported aluminum manufacturing at Reynolds and Alcoa. And we're all familiar with the involvement that Reynolds had in our area with that. Well, TVA was supplying the power for all that. TVA also supplied the power for aircraft and war vehicle manufacturing companies, such as the Vultee Aircraft in Nashville. Vultee Aircraft Aviation Corporation manufactured about 3 different types of aircraft in Nashville with aluminum that was produced by Reynolds and Alcoa, with power that was supplied by TVA. Getting right in your eyes, isn't it? Okay. Okay. And many other plants around the area, but that's what fit in very close to us there in Nashville. They also generated the power for Oak Ridge facility to produce uranium, plutonium for the atomic bomb. And that was tons and tons of electrical. One point in my research said the amount of power used at Oak Ridge exceeded the total power used in New York City by 20%. That's a bunch of power. And if that were the only place they were providing power, that would have been a handful within itself. But that wasn't the only place. But nevertheless, Oak Ridge was able to produce the atomic bomb primarily because of the power generated by TVA located in our Shoals area. Isn't that fascinating? Those dots, I didn't connect those dots until all of this. And the more I connected them, the more proud that I was for our Shoals area. TVA also supplied all the power for the old Cortland Army Airfield. And that airfield was, I don't know, somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 people, supporting new cadet pilots, 250 planes, and all the support that went along with that. Big field, a lot of power used to operate Cortland. TVA manufactured chemicals for munitions. They manufactured the nitrate, which was used in traditional bombs, artillery shells, munitions, grenades. They manufactured phosphorus for incendiary bombs, artillery shells, and they also incorporated the old PDW plant, which helped to produce dichloro, a phosphorus intermediate used in chemical weapons, sarin and mustard nerve agents. Now, as most of you know, the United States used no chemical agents during World War II. But the design and setup was there to be able to produce and use those in case they needed that. Jim Franklin, a good friend from a long time back, engineer that worked at TVA for about 15 years, worked over at the PDW plant in helping to dismantle that, remove that. Seemed like it was an easy task, no risk involved. That's not true, is it? So they produced all of that which was involved in us participating in the war. As a matter of fact, TVA produced about 60% of all the nitrate and phosphorus that was used during World War II by the United States and the Allies that we supplied with munitions. I don't know how many tons that is, but I suspect that's a lot of tonnage for 60%. So all of those chemicals were necessary to be used, and all those chemicals came out of TVA. TVA also produced calcium carbide. That is a chemical intermediate used in the manufacturing of synthetic rubber. Did you know that the United States was running completely out of natural rubber during World War II? Down to nothing. But still, we had need for all kinds of rubber. I think I had in the book, the average soldier had about 30 pounds of rubber in all of their equipment and things they used on an individual basis. And of course, that didn't include anything in the way of war equipment, war vehicles, and those kinds of things. So they had to come up with a way to manufacture rubber. T.V.A. engineers were the ones that came up with calcium carbide in order to produce the synthetic rubber that was needed to continue on with all of the manufacturing. T.V.A. helped to feed our military through improved fertilizers and a food preservation process. Did you know that T.V.A. was in food preservation process? Oh, I didn't either. What type of preservation process? Well, it's in the book. The improved fertilizers help to produce more food to be able to supply our troops. But with all the food that was being produced, a big majority of it was being lost to waste in the shipment process. So by the time it got overseas, it was unedible. So this food preservation process helped to take that food, preserve it here, ship it there, and our soldiers ate good, healthy food. I didn't. I thought T.V.A. did fertilizer. Didn't know T.V.A. did food preservation, but they did. And also T.V.A. conducted research and development for extracting chemicals from rocks and soils to help produce aluminum. When you run out of soil that can be in rock that can be used for producing aluminum, and you still need aluminum, you got to go look for aluminum and how you can make it and what can it be made from. And T.V.A. was very instrumental in producing processes. Came towards the end of the war, so they didn't perfect it as they had anticipated they would, but they were well on their way for being able to do so. T.V.A. was also in housing innovation. I didn't know that either. T.V.A. helped to pioneer and design the first process for prefabricated homes. They had a lot of people who were working on dams. You know, they built 16 dams plus power plants. And they had a lot of people that they were having to accommodate. Little towns like Florence, Sheffield, Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals didn't have the capacity in order to house those. So T.V.A. said, well, let's see if we can figure out how to construct houses that were livable and movable from place to place, dam to dam. They also developed a methodology for demountable housing. Ever heard of demountable housing? I'd heard of prefabricated houses because when Bill and I were growing up, Dad built the very first little house on Chisholm Road where the fairground, on the opposite side from the fairground, there's a string of houses there. Dad built the first one. All the rest of the houses came in on truck. And they had a little crane that set up this wall and that wall and this wall and that wall and nailed them together. And before they left that day, they had all 4 walls ready. The next day they came in, put the framework up for the roof, and they had the roof ready, prefabricated. T.V.A. came up with an idea. Let's do that in sections. So now when a house rolls in, the house rolls in 4 sections, pre-built. Took the crane, put them all together, nailed them together. The house is complete. Took an average of about a day and a half to put a house together. Everything was completed on the inside. You hooked it up to the water, hooked it up to the sewer, hooked it up to electricity. you were in business. They put together an entire team that designed and made this process work. They also increased lumber production. In 1942, it said that 90% of all the lumber that was produced was war-related. Either housing, crates for moving, platforms for shipping, and those kind of things. 1942, the United States produced and milled 33 billion board feet of lumber. About a 39% increase, 32% increase over what they had in 1939. T.V.A. was behind that in helping to create fertilizers that grew the trees, they produced the lumber to take care of the things of the war. And they also helped to implement forest management. You know, up until 1940s, 1950, very little was done in forest management. You had a stand of trees, you went and you cut them, hauled them off, and you waited till the next group of trees grew and you did the same thing. Nobody learned how to manage the forest until T.V.A. got involved to manage it. What T.V.A. build? Fertilizer and power. Oh, now houses. That's interesting. They built entire villages, such as the villages that we have here over in Sheffield with Nitrate Village 1 and 2. They built everything that helped a family survive and have a normal life while mother or dad was working on the dam, including school. I don't know if you've ever been out to the school in Sheffield, the village school. If you haven't, one day when you're in that vicinity, ask somebody how to get over there and go look at it. It is absolutely amazing. Do I lie, Kirk?
It's an amazing spot.
It is amazing. Kirk Vetter's one of my very close friends from the Shoals Writers Guild. Grew up, lived in Nitrate Village. Grandma lived in Nitrate Village. A lot of good stories, a lot of good memories.
Great place.
T.V.A. was instrumental in building and developing entire villages wherever they went and being able to accommodate. These are the typical type little houses. This type house your grandma had?
Yes.
Was it?
Just like it.
These were replicated, no telling how many times during, I don't remember how many houses were in the village, but my research, but it was a fairly substantial amount. These type of little houses built by T.V.A. to accommodate their workers, provide schools for their children. Amazing. Greg Harrison is the executive director over at the school, and he's over there most every day. If you get a chance, go take a look at that school. It is an amazing thing to see. T.V.A. supplied power and chemicals to several chemical munition plants, including the Huntsville Arsenal. They were chemical plants, munition plants scattered throughout the United States. And with 60% of the nitrate and phosphorus that were being supplied to all of these chemical and munition plants from our little old location here in the Shoals area to provide the weapons, the munitions needed for our people overseas to continue to fight. That's quite a connection. They also provided T.V.A. also provided a map and survey division, not just a few men, but a whole division that they had used to map and survey the Tennessee River. And the Army Air Corps found themselves in dire straits with maps when they were trying to do battle plans and strategies overseas. And they said, well, we will map this place out so our people know what they're getting into. They didn't have the capability to do it. So who did the War Department call on? T.V.A. T.V.A. sent a whole division. Davey, you were telling me that a few minutes ago that your dad? Yep. Fascinating. And this was an entire division. I can say this wasn't just 2 or 3 people that they sent to be able to do that. T.V.A. improved water transportation. They made the Tennessee River navigable through a series of dams, locks, and dredging the shallows. And we look at the Tennessee River today and say, well, that probably wasn't much of an effort because look what it is today. Little trivia in the book, so you don't have to buy the book to find this out. Research tells me that from Wilson Dam to Chattanooga, that stretch of Tennessee River, in places, the river was only 2 feet deep. Can you believe that? With what we look at with the river? You don't ship much with 2 feet. So they were instrumental in dredging this out, making locks and dams. So all the war equipment that was produced north of here, coming down the Tennessee River, over to the Mississippi, down to the Gulf, on the ships and out. Very important prospect of that. They also were involved in flood control, protecting communities' infrastructure and ecosystems, because without the locks and dams, there was very little water control. And of course, hand with that was the provision of preventing of the erosion. They were also very involved in infectious disease medical research. The T.V.A. chemical laboratories, research into malaria control and prevention, influenza and tuberculosis. You stop and think about the war in the Pacific and how invasive the mosquitoes were that carried malaria, that carried all kinds of diseases. The book says, in some instances, more people in a division were lost to malaria and influenza than they were lost in actual battlefield loss. So they had to have some kind of protection to that. And of course, we reap the benefit from that today, continuing. Every time somebody comes out and sprays for mosquito, T.V.A. probably had involvement in creation of what was involved in the spraying process with that. T.V.A. also helped very stringently after the war was over. Specifically, helped Japan to rebuild after their infrastructure had failed. And water control, erosion, prevention, improvement, their water navigation, helping them to rebuild and get back on their feet. The first chairman of the T.V.A., David Lithenstall, became a household name, household word in Japan while they were in the process of doing that. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time T.V.A. was involved with helping Japan in these particular areas. Back in the 30s, Japan had sent a delegation of engineers to T.V.A. to find out how to construct dams, how to take care of water erosion and those kind of things. So this was the second time around that we had been involved with T.V.A. They also helped, didn't get all of my wording up there, the Chemical Warfare Service to decontaminate, dismantle chemical weapons, and they also helped Russia in their work as consultants in there at it all. That probably didn't last long. The last dismantling and decontamination T.V.A. was involved in was completed in 2011. A long time around. Learn anything new about T.V.A.? So you're not going to walk out of here today saying T.V.A. did more than produce fertilizer and make power. Now, the book goes into a lot of detail about these subjects, has a lot more information than what we've talked about here, a lot more trivia. It's not a technical book. It's technical enough if you're technical minded. But it's written in a pretty much straightforward way so that if I can understand it as I wrote it, you certainly could understand it as you read it. But it's a book that I think will give you a 30,000-foot level look at T.V.A. in a much, much more depth and detail, and I believe it will change your opinion on T.V.A. on a lot of things. Now, 2 or 3 slides here. Book accuracy is job one. And if you buy the book, you want to know that the book is accurate. Someone's not pulling your leg. I went to a great extent, extremes, on my research to make sure that the information that I used covered as much as I possibly could cover with it, from government reports to published book to libraries to personal interviews, consultations, and those kind of things. My government documents were National Defense reports, archive records, the Office Inspector General, 1943, 44, and 45 annual reports to the T.V.A. Board of Directors, and the Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York. Wanted to make sure my engineering was right on target. So I went to all of these different sources to get my information. And then once I had all this information put together, I wanted to make sure that from a context standpoint, what I said was right. I'm not an engineer. They wouldn't let me in engineering school. But what I wanted to make sure of was when someone read it who had the engineering technical knowledge or background, it made sense. So I had several people to be involved in reading the book, editing the book, providing information, personal interviews, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, natural gas and petroleum engineers, research chemists, environmental research, and hazardous materials specialist. And anything that I had incorrect, they corrected it for me. So I think that you can be fairly rested assured that everything that you read within the book is pretty much factual and within the context that it was written. That makes me feel better in producing that. I also wanted to make sure the T.V.A. was okay with it. So their assistant general counsel reviewed information to make sure it was accurate and no confidentiality. The T.V.A. historian provided information, photographs and those kind of things. And then a member of the Tennessee Valley Historical Society here provided information as well. So I got to sign off on all of those to say, yes, it's okay. So why did I write the book? Well, number one, I wanted to publicly recognize T.V.A. employees, their family, and family members who had worked during World War II. They didn't receive the recognition then, so I wanted to make sure that they receive the recognition now. I want to make sure that this information is readily available. I spent about 18 months on my research. You're not going to spend 18 months just to find out what T.V.A. did. I know that. Had it not been for a purpose, I wouldn't have either. but I wanted to make sure that this was readily available. So if you're reading the book and you have a question, you can go to that section. Maybe that'll answer your question without having to do a lot of research. And then finally, just to help preserve this important T.V.A. Information. This is something that does not need to go down in a footnote of history. This is something that's important. Our generation appreciates it. I want to make sure that it's there for future generations, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, so that they can appreciate what great-grandpa, great-grandma did in order to further the cause of freedom in the United States. Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. The book is available here if you'd like to take a copy home with you. The book is also available on these book purchasing facilities as well. If you're not sure, I have some media sheets. I have some rack cards that you're free to carry home with you and think about it before you make that decision. Yes, I'm interested or I'm not. So with that, let me conclude my remarks and just open the floor up for any questions. I take hard questions. I take easy questions. I'm more prone to answer the easy ones, but I'll attempt to answer any question you got.
Well, I'll start it off. Just say a little bit about the women officers of public safety, because I hadn't realized T.V.A. had a female police force, security force during the war.
They absolutely did. The police force was established several years prior as a public safety because they realized they needed to sort of have some security around the dams and the plants and those kind of things. So they had a small police force and it worked very well up until World War II, and the Selective Service came along. And the Selective Service and the volunteer diminished all of that police force to about nothing. Well, there was no one to fill their place. They had the same situation in the plant, so they certainly weren't going to take people from the plant and put them into the police force. So they said, aha, can we use women in this capacity? And there was a couple of 3 women who were very instrumental in putting that package together to make it work. And they became a force to reckon with. As one of the senators said when he took a tour, and where they were talking about security and they were talking about the women police officers, and he said, well, it must be secure because nothing's happened any place on T.V.A. They had a tremendous work ethic, and they were required to do the same type things any other police force were required to do. Their physical attributes, going through obstacle courses, passing them, being able to take defensive driving and adverse driving courses, and being able to do that. They had to qualify on the range, both with sidearms and with long rifles. And they had to learn judo in order to subdue any violators that they found on it. It's an interesting chapter, and I appreciate your time, appreciate you being here, and the opportunity to talk with you, and I hope you enjoy the book.